From Caracas, Venezuela, this is From the South. My name is Reagan Devines. Another death has come as a result of violent protests in Venezuela. 21-year-old student Luis Vera is the latest victim. President Nicolas Maduro has expressed his condolences to the family of the young man who was run over in the western region of Maracaibo. He also took some time to accuse the country's opposition of exploiting young people during the demonstrations, having penned a letter to Pope Francis earlier this week on the issue.
Violencia, violencia, confusión.
Violence, violence, confusion, and another young man killed. The driver has been detained. I say this from my heart. 2 victims today. One youth who should have been at peace in his studies, which the homeland guarantees for him.
El joven que debería estar tranquilo.
And the driver with all the confusion, the violence, and the circumstances, and his legal responsibilities is also a victim.
A pesar de la confusión, la violencia y la circunstancia.
The violence over the past 2 months is being blamed for a so-called epidemic of lynchings. A man this week was stripped naked and beaten on a street in the capital city, Caracas. He was caught trying to rob a woman at gunpoint in a bakery. Weeks ago, a black man died after being beaten and set on fire by opposition protesters who assumed he was a supporter of the government. Fresh rounds of protests by Mexican journalists are demanding that justice be served there. Journalist Javier Valdez was killed on May 15th, and after a month, his colleagues are unimpressed by the results of the president's promises to fight impunity in a country where more than 90% of these cases remain unpunished. In Mexico City, protesters carried pictures of murdered and missing journalists and read out the long list of their names. In Argentina, differently abled communities took to the streets of Buenos Aires against a decision by the government of President Mauricio Macri to cut their benefits. The cuts are based on new regulations which stipulate that the recipients cannot own a car, which in the case of some disabled people may be the only way of getting around, and that their partners can't make more than $1,250 a month, which is just above the poverty line for an average family in the South American country. US President Donald Trump has announced a plan to enforce rules on Americans traveling to Cuba and to restrict US firms from doing business with Cuban enterprises controlled by the military. Some Cuban dissidents have backed Trump's tougher stance, claiming repression has worsened since the détente. The signed decree, however, will not go into effect until new regulations are issued. US Vice President Mike Pence has come under fire for his comments on Venezuela. During a Prosperity and Security in Latin America conference, Pence mimicked the words of President Donald Trump in referring to the Venezuelan leadership as authoritarian, adding that the government should be condemned. President Maduro shared his thoughts on Pence's statement.
Y yo le digo al vicepresidente de Estados Unidos.
I tell the Vice President of the United States to get your noses out of Venezuela. They have returned to fail in Venezuela. In Venezuela, there will be no gringo, Yankee, or imperialist intervention. What is coming in Venezuela is peace, democracy, and elections.
Over 10,000 Greek retirees marched through central Athens on Thursday to protest further pension cuts imposed by the government. The anti-austerity protest started 6 hours ahead of a meeting in Luxembourg of finance ministers from the Eurozone. The reforms are part of the efforts from the government to ensure that Greece gets rescue loans from European creditors. And before we close, Mexican and US breweries have combined their efforts to launch a craft beer portraying Donald Trump as a traditional Mexican mariachi musician with a swastika belt buckle. According to the brewers, the joint venture refutes the US president's Mexico rhetoric. There is more on these and other stories on our website, telesurtv.net/English. For telesur English, I'm Reagan Devines.